essentially, we recognize if we continue to send people and resources across an ocean, but people across the street don't even know who we are, that's not a sustainable or good way to advance the gospel in an increasingly diverse society.
Welcome to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Bryant. In every episode, we bring in guests who will inspire, encourage you to be more effective in your mission field. On today's episode, we have with us Mark DeYmaz. How are you doing, Mark?
Good, Eric. Great to be with you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. Oh, goodness, 20 years ago or so, you were starting off Mosaic. I was at a Mosaic in LA, and we kind of had this great conversation. I remember you were focused on building the multi-ethnic church, and your alliance kind of was dealing with that. And then we were focused more on kind of church planting, and it's been this fun coexistence over the years. But I've been watching you, even since I've been in Austin. You've continued to write, continue to make a difference. Maybe for those who don't know about Mosaic and Little Rock and your ministry there, talk about some of the ways you've been able to bring more of heaven to earth there in Little Rock.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. In fact, reflecting back on those days when you were at Mosaic in LA with Erwin, he's such a pioneer. You guys were pioneering this. I remember Erwin told me one time that, it was almost like two sisters in the same house, where his bent, your guys' bent, especially being Hollywood, the creative art side, the creativity that brings in the diversity. And of course, Erwin being himself non-white, it was always what he did. It just happened. Like, someone once said, why does a scorpion sting, right? It's because it's a scorpion, so Erwin's it's going to be a diverse crowd. He's going to make everyone feel welcome. But leaning into the creative side, the younger creative side. And then of course, here in Little Rock, Arkansas, totally different environment. We had to very much wear, if you will, multi-ethnicity on our sleeve, being intentional, casting vision. And in time, that got us to some measure of innovation and creativity. Yeah, I always feel like we're kind of two sides of the same coin, but I so appreciated Erwin, the work you guys did, pioneered, and learned a lot from that. As far as what I did, I had been in student ministries for 18 years. In 2001, or really the late 90s, I was in this amazing church. It had grown from 2,000 to 5,000 people over 8 years. My youth group, 7 through 12, had grown from 150 to 600. I had 9 full-time staff. I built a $3.5 million student center. I was in the top 2% of paid youth pastors in America. I mean, I was living the dream, Eric, until one day in the late 90s, I looked around this otherwise amazing church and realized the only people of color were janitors. And that began to bother me. In the moment, I didn't know why that bothered me, but I began to reflect on that even as I stayed there and continued to do the work of student ministries. And by 2001, I'd come to realize that what I'd been taught in seminary about the nature of the church, that there were Jewish churches filled with Jewish believers, churches filled with Gentile believers, as if they were separated. I'd been taught that the way to plant, grow, and develop churches was to focus on a single people group, as if it was biblical. I suppose today, in the terminology today, I began to deconstruct some of that learning and looked and did my own homework, so to speak, and came to realize that every church in the New Testament outside of Jerusalem was intentionally multi-ethnic, Jew and Gentile, rich, poor, men and women, as we say here in Little Rock, walking, working, and worshiping God together as one. And it was the work that was involved with that, not the words of the gospel, but the work where Christ is lifted up, drawing all people, not just some people, to himself, that really propelled the gospel forward in the first century. In 2001, I set out to basically chase a vision. Christianity Today, 3 years later, we call it a big dream in Little Rock. Could men and women of diverse ethnic and economic background will themselves to walk, work, and worship God together as one, again, in order to declare a credible witness of God's love for all people beyond mere words?
Yeah.
Christ taught us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done where? On earth as it is in heaven. So in the late 90s, and then of course, starting Mosaic in 01, we set out to address the question, if the kingdom of heaven is not segregated, then why on earth is the church? And I can't believe it, Eric. It's been 23 years now since that time. And of course, since that time, we've gone on to things like church economics, as we'll talk about today, cultural intelligence, and of course, community engagement through our nonprofit. So that little seed became much bigger. But at the end of the day, it all supports building a church filled with all people, not just some people, again, to advance the credible gospel.
Yeah. Well, in your books, from that thousands and what you learned, ethnic blends, building a healthy multi-ethnic church, remix, multi-ethnic conversations, all of that, along with the conference, Mosaic's Conference, that's MOSAIX conference.com, has really continued this important conversation, the church looking like the kingdom of God, as you described it. And more recently, you've written another couple of books that I find super fascinating, Disruption and the Coming Revolution in Church Economics. Maybe continue to tell the story of what happened there through your church and even the nonprofit that was started.
Yeah, in the church I was describing, the one in which I came from with explosive growth, suburban, upper class, if you will, money grew on trees. And of course, in environments like that, the more people that join your church, you make money, so to speak, as people put money in the offering plate. We quickly learned in the inner city, people take money out of the offering plate. And there is no way we were going to survive on tithes and offerings. I mean, in order not only to survive as a church, but to thrive in the community, to advance a credible gospel, to engage with the needs of the under-resourced, the underserved, those who are unsheltered, we recognized early on that we were going to have to, as we say today, get to a place of multiple streams of income and not solely dependent on tithes and offerings of our membership. And that led us in time to a model that I discussed in Disruption that I first laid out there, a three-legged stool approach, if you will, which we can talk about later. But in essence, it's the idea of, yes, tithes and offerings, of course, biblical generosity, of course, but then also developing a nonprofit through which you can access grants and donations outside the church that would otherwise be unavailable to your church. Grants, of course, local, state, federal, other means, and donations from people or churches outside your church that would not otherwise volunteer or send money to your church, but they will to the works of a nonprofit, food distribution, immigration counseling, to a medical clinic, counseling clinic, and more. So that opened up a second stream. And then, of course, the business side, the third leg of that stool, is where we're leveraging the assets of our church, essentially people, money, and facilities, to advance our mission, but at the same time in a purposeful way to be good stewards and generate some measure of income. And so these three legs of a stool, if you will, bring the balance and the stability to our church in terms of not only stability, but sustainability, where tithes and operate together with grants and donations, together with for-profit business income. The aggregate of that is what not only helps us survive, but thrive in our mission and here in the community. And of course, again, all that was learned as we planted a church in the inner city, again, where tithes and offerings would not alone make us viable.
Well, it's a beautiful story because in many ways, from what I hear from others, what is typically called inner city is disappearing in Little Rock. Like, you have brought life, which is really the essence of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We're supposed to bring more of this new creation, started with the death and resurrection of Jesus everywhere we go. Talk in terms of, the multi-ethnicity that is true of your church and business and nonprofit working together. How would the person that doesn't know Jesus, when they hear about Mosaic Little Rock, what are some of the things that come to their mind? Like, why these innovations weren't just for the sake of doing something new. Your heart behind it is advancing the kingdom. So how does non-believing person in Little Rock see your church because of how active you are?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll answer it in two ways. The statistics behind the He Gets Us campaign, based on Barna research of April through July of 2021, found that some 86% of adults in the United States have a favorable view of Jesus. They believe he's inclusive, life teaching is worth following, etc. They believe that he lived some 2,000 years ago, but only 11% have a favorable view of the church. And the entire campaign is meant to raise the respect and relevance of Jesus. Now, with that in mind, they basically frame their discussion around two bridges. So on someone's journey to Christ, if you think about somebody that is far away from Jesus, all the way to a fully devoted follower of Christ, that's a journey, right? They call that a faith journey. And the first bridge along that journey to help someone get over and or to meet them at, they call the bridge of his humanity. There's a second bridge a little bit further up, and it's the bridge of Christ's divinity. That would be, of course, where you invite Christ into your life, let's say are baptized and become, again, fully engaged in Christianity. In the 20th century, and still to this day, although it is no longer effective, as I've written about and argue, people and churches, pastors are still trying to engage people first, if you will, at the bridge of Christ's divinity. We're trying to say, hey, there was a virgin who gave birth to a child that God is one and three, and Jesus was 100% God and man. And it does not make sense in the 21st century. People don't get it. They don't want to get it. It actually has an adverse effect when we try to engage people at the bridge of his divinity. Of course, we want to get people to the bridge of his divinity and see them cross it. But in the 21st century, I call it a Matthew 5:16 century. In that verse, Jesus said, let them see your good works. He didn't say, let them hear your good words or apologetics or evangelism. No, it was the works that was to engage. And so if you think about it like that, what our church did 23 years ago and where we started, I didn't have that language, Eric, but essentially we recognized if we continue to send people and resources across an ocean, but people across the street don't even know who we are, that's not a sustainable or good way to advance the gospel in an increasingly diverse society. So with all that in mind, our church, if you will, again, using this language from Barna, is a church very much pitched to engage people first at the bridge of Christ to humanity. And then through that, hopefully, almost like a sales funnel, if you will, that brings those that want it down to and ultimately to cross the bridge of his divinity. So with that in mind, we typically think about a church doing spiritual work. And if you think about it like an American football teams have offense, defense, special teams. 3 separate teams, 3 separate game plans, 3 separate coaches, 3 separate players and metrics, but all playing synergistically so that the entire team wins. If you think about that as an analogy I laid out in Disruption, the American church has an offense. Let's call that the spiritual game, worship, children's ministry, visiting people in the hospital when they're sick, etc. But we virtually, very few have a defense, which would be engaging the community in real manner, food distribution, immigration services, counseling, etc., medical care, showers for the homeless, whatever you want to talk about, but in an organized way, like a defense is organized. And then hardly anybody, although it's going to quickly catch up, has that special teams of how do we leverage our financial, our human resource assets to generate profitable income to supplement stagnant or declining tithes and offerings. And again, not only keep us not only help us survive, but thrive in this economy. So all that's to say is we learn this, and what our church at a 30,000 foot view does is it's built and designed structurally to engage people first at the bridge of Christ to humanity, which takes us into the nonprofit work in our community that is widely recognized and appreciated. And then also, and so people see that. So the bottom line is, you ask the question, how do non-believers or what have you see the church? They see us engaged heavily in local missions, if you will, in community engagement, the largest food distribution in Little Rock, et cetera, et cetera. And they see that, and that's what they're drawn to first, not a message out of my mouth about Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. On top of that, they also see the economic reality of our church, how we brought economic vitality to this community, aggregated some $20 to $25 million of investment in this under-resourced community. And business people especially appreciate that because they see us stretching dimes to dollars and acting like good stewards. In the story of the Bible, I'd say the American church, it defines stewardship as management. We've got to take care of what God's given us, right? And manage it and report our tithes and offerings and accurately and all that. And that's fine. That's well and good, but that's just management. In the story of the good steward, Jesus, the story. You gave me 5, here's your 5, I made you 5. You gave me 2, here's your 2, and I made you 2. Well done, good and faithful steward. One guy, I like to say, Eric, sat on his asset, and he was called a wicked, lazy steward. And that's what the American church largely is doing, sitting on billions and billions of dollars of assets managed to death in the ground, not bringing return on investment in terms of souls saved, money to sustain stagnant tithes and offerings. It's just wicked, lazy stewardship. So long way to say, how do people who don't know Jesus and our CSC, they see us through our nonprofit work and through our business acumen, if you will. They appreciate that. And that gives us entree then to move them towards the spiritual side, hopefully from the bridge of his humanity to someday cross the bridge of his divinity.
That's beautiful. Well, I want to just mention again, Mosaic's conference, that's MOSAIX conference.com, and then Mosaic's MOSAIX.info for more on this network of really beautiful multi-ethnic churches doing really beautiful things. For someone who's listening, maybe they're just starting off at a new ministry, or they're just kind of catching this vision of bringing more of heaven to earth where they are. How would you encourage a pastor, church leader in just getting started?
Yeah, great question. It all starts with a calling. I think about 4 P's: passion, prayer, patience, persistence. Passion is you have to know in your belly, God is calling you to do the work that he's called you to do. In this particular context, to plant, grow, or develop a healthy multi-ethnic church, to establish a 3-legged stool approach to ministry: spiritual, social, financial. By the way, those are the words, right? Offense, defense, special teams, spiritual, social, financial, if you will. You've got to know that in your belly, because still at this point in time, although things are changing and will change, it's still largely an anomaly. And sometimes you're selling a car people don't want to buy. Now, it's gotten much better over the last 20 years, I can tell you that. But still, particularly when we talk about the economics, it's still selling a car that people, as of yet, don't understand the need for them to buy and to drive. So that passion has to come from God. You hear the voice of God one way or another saying, Mark, Eric, I want you to do this. Now, I think about that like a man getting on his knee and inviting a woman to, engagement, right? Offering her a ring, say, will you marry me? Just because a man extends a ring doesn't mean the woman will accept it, right? So the passion is God's calling. You've got to know that in your gut, and then you have to accept it. And I call that prayer, obviously ongoing prayer. But in that moment, at some moment in time, you recognize this is what God wants me to do in this season of my life. And yes, I will put the ring on. And just like in a marriage, you keep that ring on, because that's what requires then patience and persistence over time to see the full productivity, or to see this vision come to life. There's no silver bullet. So to me, the most important thing is you got to know God wants you to do it, and you got to sign on for the journey. And then if you don't quit, you will get there. Now, more practically, beyond the personal side of that, when I think about these 3 legs of the stool, people often ask, how would you advise me to start? Would it be on the business side? Would it be on the nonprofit side? Would it be on the church? I just say you chase the low-hanging fruit. What you want to do is get a vision on paper. And I'm not just talking about a mission statement, a vision statement, a logo, and a website, right? I'm talking about in 7 to 10 years, this is where we see our church. A 3-legged stool like a football team. We've got a strong spiritual side, meeting the needs of people spiritually, seeing people come to Christ, generating tithes and offerings. We've got a strong presence in our community through our nonprofit, engaging the real and felt needs of people in our community, making an impact, generating income through grants and donations. And we've got a strong business side, leveraging our assets to generate sustainable income. But none of that's going to happen overnight, as we both know. But it's important to understand that vision, to lay it out on paper for people you're attracting as a church planter, and or as you're transitioning a church from a 1-dimensional game to 3, put it on paper and say, within 7 to 10 years, we want to get here. And then where do you start? You start with, really, it's related, but you think about first your own gifting. Think about an American football coach. No coach that I'm aware of at a high level of college or professional, the NFL, no coach is the head coach and also the coordinator of the offense, defense, and special teams. Some coaches just are the head coach. Some coaches might say, okay, I'm the head coach and I will be the offensive coordinator, and they hire the other 2. That's super important, not only to know who you are, but who you're not. And so when you lay out this vision and you understand it as a North Star over 7 to 10 years or more, you start by saying, who am I and who am I not? Is my bent towards the spiritual game? Is my bent towards meeting the needs of the homeless and the immigrant and the social side? Is my bent towards business? And in that role, I might say, okay, I want to be the head coach and I want to be the executive director of the nonprofit, which means I need a strong pastor, right, on my team, somebody who's got that spiritual heart, and I need to get a business person along, kind of like a trinity at the top, right? You need those 3 types of people across the board, but it begins with you. Which role do you want to play? Head coach and head coach only, but you want to think about that as you look over time to build out your team. And so put that together by knowing who you are and coaching out and playing that game synergistically with other coordinators, if you will, to do it. And then in terms of structurally, which one do you chase first? I always say you want to chase the low-hanging fruit. If what's right in front of you is I'm making this up, is the opportunity to start a coffee shop because you got an investor, et cetera, get the economic side going. If what's in front of you is the opportunity to open a church and get some people going, you've got some financial backing, whatever, chase the church first. But again, it's all about understanding, I think Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, communicating that to people, and then getting yourself in the right, as some people say, seat on the bus, and then also chasing low-hanging fruit. And then again, just the patience and persistence over a long period of time. I'll tell you this, I'll end this little question with this. It's erroneous for networks and denominations, as they have for 20 plus years, to say to a church planter, you've got to be sustainable in 2 to 3 years. They don't even understand what the definition means of sustainability. I won't get into that right now. But I would suggest to you, whether you're planting this vision and or transitioning a church to chase this vision in the 21st century for the reason we discussed, it's going to take 7 to 10 years to move from survival to stability. And what I mean by survival is just getting out of the gate, getting your feet on the ground. It's going to take a minimum of 7, if not 10 years to get from the early stages of survival to some measure of stability in this work, and another 7 to 10 to move from stability to sustainability.
Well, I really appreciate your wisdom. We're going to be giving away copies of your book to those who sign up for my email newsletter at ericbryant.org. Mark, thank you for inspiring us, equipping us, and continuing to do such great work.
You bet. I appreciate you through the years, my brother, and God bless in all you're doing.
Thanks for joining us. More resources available at ericbryant.org.